Good morning, and I guess it's a well, Young Suk is done a great job talking about the irrigation and a lot of what I'm going to talk about this morning here has to do with water. I guess to his last question regarding where we are, and unfortunately, if we had to have one word for the forecast here for at least the next week, it's dry. And especially for the southern part of the state. So as to when the timing on the next application, it's probably now. As we look ahead here, it does look like again a continued dry pattern. There may be some changes beyond that, but for the next upcoming week, we likely will see below normal precipitation. Well, let me get moving here. There we go. And I'm going to start. I wanted to say one thing. If you've certainly watched the news and locally or beyond that, there's been a lot of talk about weather extremes here this year, and we've talked about that here during the weather briefings. And I've got a series of maximum minimum temperatures here. These are from Lansing, the airport there, but this could be literally anywhere in the state of Michigan. It's fairly representative, and this graphic I think really describes some of what we've seen, at least in terms of temperature. And again, these extremes here, we're dealing mainly with either extreme high or even extreme low. But in the graphic here, these blue bars are the observed minimum and maximum temperatures. So the top of the bar is the max that day, and the min is the bottom. And they've been drawn here with the climatology of Lansing, so the 30-year average between 91 and 2020, to give us some perspective about where that fits. And it's really, well, it's interesting, and it's also somewhat, it might be surprising, but it is interesting to note the brown area here in the middle. That's the normal range of maximum temperatures. That's what those 30-year averages say. The top again is the normal high, and the bottom of the brown area the normal low. And the sort of the reddish color here, those are the record highest temperatures for the date, and the record lowest temperatures are on the blue. So it gives us again an idea of climatologically what we might see. You can see from the beginning of March up through here yesterday that we've got our annual increase in temperatures. We're moving into the middle of the summer, and that's not a surprise. But what is, again, somewhat the reason I've got this here, note that some of these periods where we had temperatures, the daily temperatures, the observed ones, were at or even exceeding the records for the date. We've had a lot of that, and not just here, but in other parts of the U.S. And I've got some of those outlined here during the last couple of months. But you can see several episodes of, in this, especially over the last few weeks, of unusually warm temperatures. So if you're wondering, it seemed more variable than normal, the answer is definitely it is. We don't see this type of pattern very often. The next issue is, well, why did we see that? And the direct answer is down here on the bottom. It's the configuration of the jet stream. We talk about this so often in the mid latitudes around the world. The jet stream, its configuration and behavior is one but overwhelming dominant factor for our day-to-day weather patterns. And this year, this spring, and the last several weeks, the pattern in the jet stream has been unusually amplified. That is these ridging and troughing features, which we talk about all the time. They're larger, they're more north to south than is typically the case at this time of the year. The other part to note about this is that many times we'll see an upper air, or not many times, but sometimes we'll see the upper air pattern stagnate or stay relatively constant. That's when we see problems with, well, long-term drought or warm spells or the reverse, long-term cloudy, wet conditions. When those things, but this year in general, the flow has been progressive. And so those features, those ridging and troughing features, have been moving from west to east after several days. You can see that, again, the timing of this, we're seeing a big change in weather, a roller coaster ride, literally, with temperatures from much above to below normal and back and forth about once every week or so on the average. And that's been the pattern we've been stuck in. So if it has seemed variable, it has, and by all measures, certainly by climatological measures here, and probably we'll see a continuation of this, at least for the short-term future. For the last week itself, a beautiful weekend last weekend, but in general, because of the recent warm temperatures, you can see warmer than normal conditions on the left here, 2 to 4 degrees Fahrenheit above normal, above the means for the last week, not just for Michigan, but for the entire Midwest. Rainfall, and following on Young Suk's comments here, it depended on where you were, but there was a fairly noticeable gradient from the highest rainfall totals in northern parts of the state. Some areas 2-3 inches, you can see in the eastern Upper Peninsula, to essentially nothing down in the far south. And that has been the case for the last couple of weeks. We've had more precip north and less as you go farther south. And that pattern actually is a part of the forecast as well. We're going to see that forecast. For degree day totals with an above normal week here, we're still, for at least for central and southern parts of the state, we are still running a surplus of degree days. These are base 50 corn degree day totals beginning on May 1 up to the present. Exception to this pattern up in the far north in the UP, and then in areas west up into the upper lakes, there is a little bit of a deficit. So again, a little cooler than normal in the far north and warmer than normal in the south. So we've got right now at this point, again, most areas a surplus. It equates in terms of calendar time to a few days, maybe as much as a week ahead of normal if you get down towards the Indiana and Ohio line. So a little bit ahead of normal, a little bit behind normal in the far north. Well, let's look at the forecast here real quickly. We were talking before the program started here, the virtual breakfast started. And in my book, personally, this morning, sort of crisp, we have a Canadian origin air mass in place over the region, the big high here you can see over northern Illinois. This is a cool and dry air mass, and it is just leading to almost ideal. I can't, it's just gorgeous. It's a little chilly, actually. We have some low 40s reported in northern parts of the state, but you can see from the satellite virtually no clouds. The other part that's important here now, this air mass is dry. The humidity levels are low, and that's actually part of what allowed the surface temperatures to drop down into the 40s. It's in the 50s in the south, but still just and today with high pressure over the area, this is just going to be an almost perfect day to be outside. You're going to need probably a hat and sunscreen because there'll be strong sunshine. But besides that, just almost ideal conditions for being outside. High temperatures today from the upper 70s north to the low 80s, really close to what the climatology says where we should be. It'll drop down into the 50s again for lows tonight. And then we will see the warmth and heat in that so-called heat dome that's been across the U.S. for several weeks here. It spreads back north again. This is the map for tomorrow morning. The only difference tomorrow, it's going to be dry. Again, another dry day across the state and mostly sunny conditions, but the temperatures will be 5 to 10 degrees warmer tomorrow than they have been today. So tomorrow, start to look for, again, we'll call it very warm. Most places mid to upper 80s will probably push 90 degrees for a high once again tomorrow in some central and southern locations of the state. The same thing again on Saturday. But again, back to our major topic today of irrigation. What about precip? Well, you can see here by Saturday morning, this is and the map here, there is precipitation headed the next weather system. It's a low pressure system with an attached frontal boundary here. Whoops. And that really is the next system. Now, it depends on where you are in terms of the probabilities and the amounts of precipitation here. And again, just like what we saw in the observed precipitation totals earlier, there's going to be, I think, a fairly distinct north to south difference in both the amount of precipitation and the probabilities of precipitation and aerial coverage. Right now, most of the guidance strongly suggesting best chances for rainfall. This will begin overnight Friday in the UP, far northern part of the state, and then spread south across much of the rest of the state during the day on Saturday, and then Saturday evening into early Sunday. So that's the next chance for, I think actually it's probably the best chance for precip here from the entire upcoming week. But as I said, best chances will be in the north and then decreasing as you go south. So there will be areas, unfortunately, again, where Young Suk was showing some of the plots in the far south and southwest that unfortunately probably see little or no precipitation. And we could go through another entire week without precip in that southern part of the state. Beyond that, we are looking for the system that moves through here over the weekend. It will bring in more Canadian air early next week. You can see the jet stream forecast pattern here for next week, showing a troughing feature over eastern North America, a return to northwesterly flow. And this is, I think this pattern here is important. Note that there's a big sort of a block out here, a big ridge out over Alaska and Western North America. That appears to be the pattern that we're moving towards in July. And the reason I say it's important is because it does force, again, lower a little bit of troughing over the area. And depending on how strong that is going to have a huge impact on whether we are cooler and wetter than normal. And it will be the case farther north you go. But there's also an area here to the south, just to the south is the main flow of the jet stream that likely will be warmer and drier. So a fairly tight gradient with both temperature and precipitation expected. That's a little bit of a complication for the medium range. Again, I'm thinking now about the first couple weeks of July, and certainly as the crops advance into more sensitive stages, that's something we need to pay attention to. The same pattern here for next week, you can see we do see normal to below normal temperatures suggested over. So after the warm up here tomorrow and Saturday, we will go back down to normal or even a little bit below normal for next week. So if it's dry, that will keep a little bit, reduce some of the water demands. Here's the precipitation total forecast through next Thursday morning. And as I mentioned here, you can see some spots, western upper Michigan, maybe picking up as much of an inch as an inch, but as you go south and east from there, much, much less, and generally certainly less than a quarter of an inch. In some areas, we don't see this very often in this product because it's the potential precip. It's a little aggressive in terms of the amounts, but you can see some areas there in northern lower actually where no precip is expected. So again, we'll have to keep an eye on that. It could change between now and Saturday, but right now there's not a lot of water for the system to work with, and so rainfall totals are going to be limited, both in terms of amounts and in terms of coverage. Just as importantly, and back to what Young Suk has talked about, we have seen very, very high potential evapotranspiration rates here in Michigan over the last few weeks, especially over the last couple, and Young Suk showed some of those values, and I've got a couple down at the bottom here as well. But we've actually seen values here in the last week with the really warm temperatures and the full sunshine above a quarter of an inch per day, some cases approaching 3/10. For Michigan, that's the top. That's climatologically, that is the most that we would ever expect to see. Very, very high levels. Now, again, that's the potential rate. What it reflects is what the atmospheric demand, what the meteorological conditions suggest, how much water could evaporate if it were available. Now, fortunately, a lot of our crops are still developing, and leaf area is limited, and of course, the actual amounts are less than that. But the point remains is that if the plant was there and the amount of water extracted by the atmosphere demanded is very, very high. And you can see the totals down here. Look at the rainfall totals, which have been in most areas below normal, only 1.6 inches here at East Lansing for the last month, but the potential evapotranspiration rates, again, way up beyond that, so far exceeding what the actual precip, which means rapid depletion of moisture or plant available moisture, especially in the top of the profile where the roots still are. And I live in Hazlitt, and I live on the Sphinx loamy sand that Young Suk talked about, and it typically does not hold much water at all. And I certainly, my lawn has gone dormant in the last week. It just can't keep up anymore. And it usually is one of the first ones but it's early this year. And again, it's a direct reflection of this high demand that we've seen here. The forecast is for more higher than normal. Even with the cooler temperatures, you can see totals here, generally between 0.2 and 0.25 inches per day on average for the upcoming week. So with the dry forecast, the water is certainly going to be an issue, and with the irrigation, keep a close eye on that, because probably the water demands are going to be higher than one would certainly expect or typically work with for this time of the year. Looking at here, just to finish up here, the medium range, this guidance looks a lot like the map I showed here just a minute ago. You can see the trough here, the upper air over Hudson Bay, and then that block out over the western part of the U.S. And again, the interesting part here, looking at our mean temperatures, You can see some cooler than normal up here along the US-Canadian border, but also a large area warmer than normal to our south over much of the southern and western Corn Belt. Same thing for precip, similar pattern, wetter than normal to the north, drier than normal to the south. 8 to 14 day outlook is very similar to this. But as I said, the key and the real tough one, and it's a little tough to say right now, but where does that jet stream actually set up? How far south does it go? That will have a huge impact on what we actually see here. But it's something to watch and keep an eye on as it develops. And moving into the last one here to show you new long lead outlooks. These were issued by the Climate Prediction Center last Thursday to share. And some of it is basically consistent with what we've seen before, namely that the expectations for warmer than normal temperatures. The month of July here on the top, mean temperatures you can see for much of Michigan, maybe except for the portions of upper Michigan, expected to see warmer than normal temperatures. That's also the case for the next 3 months, the middle to latter part of summer, July through September. That's consistent with previous forecasts. We still have La Nina conditions out in the Pacific, although it's not having as much an influence now as it does at other times of the year. The difference, and I think the thing to really talk about here as notable, is that there were some new developments, and that's looking at precip forecast. Again, July in the upper right and July through August on the bottom, you can see a large area of drier than normal conditions here now in the outlook that really wasn't there before. You can see it's just to the south and west of Michigan. A lot of it's over the central Corn Belt. And that's what I've got on the left-hand side here, something to, and I only bring this up, it's just something to watch because of the extreme conditions within our supply chain right now with our crops and what's going on internationally and prices and any hint here of weather-related issues is obviously relevant. But with this outlook, which is again is a somewhat new, and with conditions drying out in, well, we see it in parts of Michigan, but we see even in more over portions of the central Corn Belt. In the lower left-hand side here, this is the percentile of water in the top 3 feet of the soil profile, and all the browns and oranges here are all below normal. And again, we're still in the vegetative stages of our annual crops, but it's something to watch. If it were to continue, it very well could become an issue. And again, our outlook is a little bit different, so something to watch, and we'll hope that that doesn't materialize, but it could be a big factor in the markets here in the few weeks ahead. And with that, I'll summarize again: a dry outlook, maybe with the exception of the far northern part of the state, and beautiful today, a little hot side tomorrow and Saturday, and then cooling off again next week. Next chance for precip, and I didn't talk about this, but after Saturday, probably the middle of next week would be the next chance. And right now, it is not. It's not looking like anything widespread next week. Some of the medium range forecast guidance, though, does suggest more chances for precipitation once we move into the end of the first week or second week in July. We'll watch that, but it is a dry outlook. And so with that, I'll move on here and introduce our speaker for next week. And that's Dr. Brooke Wilkie with MSU's Kellogg Biological Station facility, and a really timely topic here given where we are. He's going to be talking about cover crops after wheat, and you got a 2-for-1 today for next week, at least for an introduction. And that is, I am going to be out of the country, but I'm lucky to have a colleague here, Dr. BJ Bowley, an ag meteorologist, and he's going to be providing next week's weather briefing in my place. And great, so everything this will be covered, even though some people are not here. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Phil to talk about our UP credits.